Hey everybody, Zach here, and welcome to the 9th lesson in this RTS tutorial series. In this lesson, we will set up our day and night cycle. So go ahead and fire up the Unreal Editor, and let's get started. So here we are back in our editor, and if we hit play, we can see the clock is still working from last time. We have our time and our date. And remember, we're going to remove this as we go on. It is just here right now to show you that it's working. It's for debugging only. So we're going to exit our simulation. We're not going to go into our blueprints yet. We have one thing to do in this screen first. On my world outliner, I'm going to close the obstacle folders a bit, and I'm going to go down to lighting. I'm going to select my light source. Now, it's going to select something down here on the map, but what it's really controlling is that nice little orb of light in the sky there, our sun. And you'll see on mobility it's set to stationary. Well, we want to change this to movable. We want our sun to move. And as you can see, we've now got, sorry, not as you can see, we now have everything in here set up that we need to take care of. The next thing we need to do is we need to come in here and we need to create a new folder in our blueprints. And I'm going to name that folder Lighting. And actually, before we do anything with lighting, what I want to do is I want to go to our game settings. I want to open up our game state where we set our clocks. And I want to create a new function called getGameSpeed. And all we're going to do is we're going to add a new function. As I said, we're going to name it getGameSpeed. This way that any blueprint that calls or references this blueprint can get game speed. What we need is one output, which we will name game speed. And our game speed will be a float, of course, just like before. I'm going to drag that out just a tiny bit. Actually, I didn't drag it out that far. And if we go into our game speed settings, assuming you use the same category as I did, we can drag out our game speed, and we can attach it to this game speed. And this is all we need to do in terms of prep to get everything to work. So compile and save, close that out. We're back in our content browser if you have two browser windows like I do. Go back to our blueprint, and then go into our new folder that we call Library. Right click and create a blueprint class. This class will be Actor. And I'm going to name this Sun Rotation BP. Open it up, pin it into the window. And honestly, we don't really need to do anything in the viewport. I just don't like the scene component. So I'm going to create a new one called Scene, drag it over, and there we go. Going to go over to my event graph, and I'm going to delete the event actor begin overlap and move my event tick down a tiny bit. So the first thing I am going to do is I am going to create an event that, sorry, actually not the first thing I'm going to do. First thing I'm going to do is cast a reference. But instead of creating a reference cast in macro like I did before, like we've done before that is, I am going to just do it right here in this window. The reason I'm doing it this way is this blueprint does its job once and it's done. We don't need to worry about the references lasting. We don't need to worry about a whole bunch of other things. Once it's initialized, it will do its job, hopefully. So I'm going to right click under Event Begin Play, type in Get Game State. The reason why we're getting game state is our time is being stored in there. And I'm going to drag off of this, and I'm going to cast. And we have a couple of cast options. We have to the default game state, and we have to the game state we've created. Of course, we want this one. And I'm going to turn this into a pure cast. So right click, convert to pure. And off as RTS Game State BP, I am going to drag and click Promote to Variable. And this will be Game State Ref. And I'll create a category called References as usual. And we're going to hook this up to our event begin play. Then I'm going to drag in my game state controller again, get game state reference, and I'll explain why I'm not using this pin in half a second. And I'm just going to drag up and type in bind event. You'll notice it's defaults on the game under damage setting, but if you look up, we have our sort of references to events that we created in our game state. We have our game speed control. Remember, that's what's attached just below our event tick. And so I'm going to click that, and I'm going to hook that up to the setting of the game state reference. The reason I'm not using this pin and attaching it to target is simply because there are sometimes issues when you use these the sets and then reference off of them. Also, just because I am very much used to C++, I don't like, not having an initialized variable or an initialized reference and then using it. I don't like initializing and using in one go. I want it initialized to begin with and then for it to go. Now, if you don't remember what I mean when I said earlier that this is in our game state, if you go back to your game state and let's close get game speed out. If you look under our event tick, we have our game speed, and this event is known as game speed control. Remember I said when we want to refer back to this, we're going to call this up. So we are calling it up here, and we're going to call it up by, well, creating an event. So we're going to drag off that red box, create event. Now you'll notice that we don't have the event here yet, and that's slightly a problem. We're actually going to have to create it in that space we made a second ago. So I'm just going to leave this box here for a moment, and I'm going to finish up this line of code. First thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag my game state reference back in. I'm going to get it. I'm going to drag off of it, and I'm going to get that new function created, which is get game speed. And notice we have the variable options. We don't want those. We want the function. Just drag those up a little bit so it lines up a little bit nicer. Plug that in, and I was way off my lining that up. So that goes there. And from here, we are going to set a reference. This will be, we're going to set this as a new variable. So we're going to drag off game speed, promote to variable, and we're going to name this one game speed. And this will be in a category I'm going to call time. So our event begin play outside of this create event is pretty much done. So let's create our event. And this is going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to right click. We're going to type in custom event. And we're going to name this get game speed. And our custom event needs one input, which is going to be a float, and it's going to be named game speed. And we're going to plug our game speed variable into there that we made here, so it sets. And I'm going to compile. We're going to get an error. We're only getting that error because there was nothing in here. We couldn't get anything in here because this didn't exist. Now that this exists, we can select get game speed, bracket game speed, and we can compile, and that error goes away. Now comes the tricky part of today. So we need a couple of things. First, well, what we're going to do is we need to get our game time. And if you remember, we created that library where we initialize our game time. So we're just going to drag off this delta seconds and type in set game time. And you'll notice that we have game speed from our variables here, and this function under game time called set game time. And this is our RTS function library, which we can see our little helpful tooltip there, function to help run / pass game time using hours. So I'm just going to drag that in here. I am realizing that we've made a slight mistake. So we're going to fix that mistake from last week by going to our content browser. We're going to go back to our blueprints. We're going to go to our library, and we're going to open up our RTS function library. The mistake I made, and I need to double check how I didn't catch this earlier, is that this is supposed to be a pure function. So we're going to create pure. I'm having a little bit of lag there. Compile and save. And as we are doing this, I'm just going to open up my test file of this and double check that what I have done is accurate. Yep, it is definitely pure. So we're going to have another fix to make in a second. Let's go back to our game state. All we got to do is just move that slightly out of the way. It should still work. We're going to compile, save. We're going to very quickly test it to make sure the timer is still working. And it appears to be. So we're good. Sorry about that. So we can close our game state back out. We can close our RTS library functions back out now that we've turned that into a pure function. And it's plugged into our game time there quite nicely. We have our game speed already, so we can just plug our game speed into there. And we're going to need to create a new variable that we are going to call game time. And just like before, or earlier this week, I don't know why I keep saying last week. I'm imagining I'm doing one video a week, even though this one will be posted a weekend after that last one. And I'm going to put it in the category of time, of course. Going to drag it into here, so it's set like that. And now we're going to get our game time. We don't really need to worry about the day count. There are things we could do with this, and I'll talk about things we could do in a minute. Before we do anything else, we're going to create two new variables. The first one we're going to name sunref. And sunref is our reference to our sun. And we want this to be exposed. And what this will be, we're going to type in directional, and you'll find directional light. And we want that to be, sorry, I'm just going to redo that real quick so you can see something. We want that to be of object reference. Category is going to be references. And we're going to create one more variable. And this will be our sky sphere ref. And I'll give you a guess what this one's going to be. If you type in sky sphere, you'll see BP sky sphere. Again, we want the object reference, and again, we want to expose this. Yep, I've stopped trying to say that word, so yeah. We'll move this up to references. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drag our sun reference in. We're just going to plop it right there, get. And what we want to do is we want to add actor rotation, or add actor local rotation. So it will be add actor local, and then we have offset and rotation and transformation. As I said, we want rotation. Just go ahead and plug your event tick. So every time it ticks, we want a location set for our sun. And we also need to change its direction. Now, I know we haven't set its rotation yet, but that comes next. So we're going to grab our sky sphere reference, and we're going to get it. We're going to drag off of it, and we're going to do update sun direction. It's a function built into the blueprint for sky spheres. Quite useful. I don't know why I'm lagging so much. Drag into there, hook it up. And everything is set up except for the connection between our time and our new rotation. So there are a few ways to do this. And I'm going to show you just the simplest way to do it. It won't take into account time of year. So, winter months will have the same amount of daylight as summer months. There are a few ways to do it, and once we've done this part, I will very quickly explain how you can do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag off of game time, and we're going to divide this value, if I can figure out how to find the backslash key there, by float. And the float we're going to divide it by is 1/2. So we want our game time divided by 1.5. We are then going to divide this resultant number by 6. So I'm going to do float divide by float a second time, and I'm going to put 6 in. Now, before I go any further, sorry, I put 3 in there. Before I go any further, I will say I have tried numerous ways of doing this setup, including just using one set of division. I don't know why I honestly don't know why it requires 2. I have tried different numbers in here. In each one, I've tried different numbers in a single one. I have tried various combinations. I cannot get this to work without doing it this way. And I will say again, this is a little bit nearing the edge of my wheelhouse in terms of we're now getting into graphics and the way objects move. And for some reason, my mind just does not work that way. I am doing on my own on the side, by the way, learning graphic stuff. And in fact, actually, we might be using some assets I make for future lessons where we need, say, resources, say a tree. So yeah, you get to use some pretty bad assets I'll be making, or some pretty bad objects I'll be making, unless you have your own. So we're going to drag off this new value we get. So our game time's now divided by 1.5, and then divided by 6, and we are going to multiply this. Now I can explain to you why we are doing this multiplication, and it will be a float by float. And we are setting this to 90. What this does, and I've tried different ways of doing this as well, is this actually keeps the sun in the correct spot in the sky. And by which I mean the correct spot. If we don't have this, it's going to start rotating all over the sky. It won't go east to west. It will just do random things. It's not so random, actually, but still, it won't do what we want it to do. Now, some people will have a bit after this where they add 15, 30, 45, and I think I've seen one... no, I haven't seen greater than 45, actually. Honestly, I cannot, based on the way we have set up our time, it does not work. If you've just set up your time off the event tick and you're doing it purely on seconds, there's no day count, nothing like that, then yes, you need to add in that addition root. But if you are doing it, if you're doing time the way we have done it, you do not need to do it because we've already accounted for what that 15 is adding in. Which I'm not entirely sure what it is. I just know it's something on how we set up this, these two parts. So now that that's done, what we're going to do is we're going to take this resultant value, and this will become our new rotation, actually. Except for we need to make it a rotator. And there's a few ways we can do this. We could split the struct and plug this in to the correct new pin, but I'll say that if you do that, you're going to run into issues. I'm not entirely sure why there, because this is node editing. If this were done simply in C++, it would be a little bit simpler and pretty much how I would handle it, but that's a different matter. So you're going to drag off that new pin, not right click, type in make rotator, and it's going to default to the X axis there. We want to change it to the Y axis, and we want to plug this into our delta rotation. And we're going to compile and save, and we're done. I'm just going to leave this window open for debugging purposes, but you can go ahead and close it. The last thing we need to do, so we hit play, and I'm going to eject from the guy there, and we look up, the sun isn't moving. In fact, we got the light source, the sun isn't moving. Now, unlike last time, I know what the mistake is. I forgot to actually tell it to move the sun. So we're going to hit stop. I'm going to look back down here. Doesn't matter where we put the object we've just created, but if you go into your lighting, just drag your sun rotation BP in there. And all we need to do now is set our references. So if you have your sun ref, it will give you one choice, which is a light source. And that is our only directional light. And if you click on this drop down, we only have one sky sphere, so we can click that, and it sets it. Now we are done. I am going to hit play, and like before, I'm going to hopefully not watch my pawn sphere run out the map like that, but hopefully hit eject, it's going to go out anyway, and I'm going to look up. Now, it's really hard to see this, but the sun is moving, and in fact, if we grab our light source, we can see that it's moving. Alright, so we know it's working. And next week, we're going to add in, sorry, not next week, in 2 lessons, we are going to set up a way to control the game time so we can speed it up or slow it down. But right now, what I want to do is I want to show you that this is working by manually speeding up our time. So I'm going to exit out of this. I'm going to go back to our game settings and into our game state library. I'm going to stay in our event graph. I'm going to find our default game speed, and I know this is always going to be 150, but right now I'm going to set this to 0.0025. I'm going to compile and save, and I'm going to go back to the game, and we'll know the clock is speeding up. I'm going to hit eject, and well, unfortunately, it's moving so fast that we can't see it. So let me try a slower speed. I'm going to just reduce that to 0.025 instead of the 00 there. We'll hit play. We'll hit eject. And if you run into this error where it's moving, but it is no longer actually moving the sky at this point, what we can do is we're going to hit stop. Go down to your sky sphere. Refresh material. Just click it. Nothing will happen. Nothing you'll see will happen, but it actually will do something. And I'm just going to make sure that that does cover everything that I meant for it to. Yep, everything is correct there. I'm just double checking that I haven't changed anything else that I forgot about between doing my test run and this final version. Nope, it appears everything is set, so I'm going to hit play one more time. I'm going to eject. And okay. Well, like I said, I left this open for a reason. We are going to just go in here for a second. Switch this over to the... Oops, sorry, that's the wrong one. Go over to our sun sphere. Yep, it is changing correctly. So, why are we not working? Right, well, that said, I am going to pause the video for a minute and work out what is going on here. Give me 1 second. Alright guys, I'm back. Sorry about that. Apparently I was completely mistaken. There is not a glitch like I thought there was. The reason why I'm having an issue is in my test version of this, I have done everything for this section. And I was thinking about that when I went to look at the code again. And the first thing I looked at was something we've set up already and went, well, we're only updating part of it, which is why this isn't working. And that is what's happening. We're only updating part of it. So currently I have it. Currently it's working. I'm just going to show you it's working right now by hitting play. I don't even need to eject. You can see something is happening, but I'm just going to eject right now, and you can see the sun just shooting past us over and over again pretty quick. So if you wanted to do that, all you got to do is, well, first we're going to exit this, go into the game state, and what I did was I set the game speed to 0.025 as well. In fact, I'm just actually going to set this to 0.25, and I'm going to set the default game speed to 0.25 as well. I'm going to hit compile. I'm going to go back here, hit play, and we're going to eject, and you can see in a second or two, once I can find where the sun is. It'd be lovely to know where this thing's rising from. Well, okay, so I might not be able to easily find where our sun is. There it is. Alright. You can come back at any time. There we go. So let's hopefully you can see it rise somewhere in a second. There, it rises, it comes up, it goes around, and it sets. Not sure why it wasn't letting me move there. So we now have a moving sun. The reason why, I'm just going to exit this out, this wasn't working correctly earlier, is when we update, when we start the game, we want to start at one particular speed, which is our default speed at 150, which will turn a 1 hour, one real life hour into one game day. But what happens is we're actually pulling from this game speed when we do the sun rotation. And the component is going to control how these pieces work together. It's actually going to be located in our user interface. Now, we could do some coding in here, some scripting in here that, automatically figures out what it's at default and, meets and changes to that, but we don't need it. This is really going to be paired with our user interface at the end. So we don't need to do that coding. So we're done for the week. All I'm going to do is set our defaults back to 150. Just going to make sure to actually set the default, compile, and save. And I'm going to hit play just to make sure my sun is not shooting around my sky. My time looks right. And there's my sun. All right, so join me next week when we set up our user interface. The week after that, or the video after that, we'll be connecting our user interface to our game clock. All of that said, please leave a comment below and let me know what is working, what isn't working, what you want to see in the series. As always, likes are greatly appreciated. It lets me know that I am bringing you content that you value and that works for you. Feel free, again, to join us on the Discord channel or on Twitter or Reddit. All of that said, make sure to hit that subscribe and notify icon so you know when the next lesson is out. And I look forward to seeing you next week or in the next lesson. And as always, I hope that you have a wonderful day.